everyone. Welcome back to JP's Budget Collecting and our weekly look back at the hot comics from 6 months ago. Today we're looking back at the hot comics from August 28th, 2020, and I'm recording this on February 26th, 2021. As always, what we're doing here is trying to look back, see what books were hot, understand what factors were making them hot at the time, see how those factors played out over the last 6 months, and whether the book held steady, whether it dropped back, whether it gained. So we can all make better decisions about what books we chase and whether we're just patient on them. With patience has been less effective in the last year or so with the way comics have gone, but still pretty effective most of the time. So, as always, we're also looking back at the CBSI Hot Top 10 and the Comic Tom Key Collector Hottest Trending Comics of the Week. CBSI puts out a list of 10. Key Collector actually puts out a list of 20, but Tom picks 10 of those, and we focus on the 10 that Tom uses for his video. So this week we got 18 books between the two videos, so not much overlap this week. So with that, let's get into the list. We only had one sort of option news this week, and it is Cartoon Network starring #1, the first Powerpuff Girls in comics. And basically this was because there was rumors of a live action adaptation coming to the CW. I didn't actually check to see if that still seems to be on track or not, but that was the rumors that caused this book to hit the list. Back then, raw copies were going for $30, 9.8s were going for $250. Now raw copies are going for $10 to $125. I'll get into why here in just a second. Mostly they're in the $40 to $60 range though, so up a little bit for the most part. 9.8s, there have been no kind of recent sales on those. So why the wide range? People are listing this book differently. If you look at the title there, it says Cartoon Network starring, and then it says the Powerpuff Girls underneath and stuff. So it's listed as Powerpuff Girls #1, it's listed as Cartoon Network starring #1, so on and so forth. So there's a little bit of mix and match in how this is listed. So people have gotten it for 10, people have for some reason paid $125. Generally, it's going for that $30 to $40 range, or $40 to $60 range. So generally, this one's up, and it's been doing well. So I don't know if that means there's a show coming or not, but that's what's going on here. Also, watch out there's a Burger King version of this, and so make sure you're actually getting the right book. Next, we have Spider-Man Noir #3. So this is the start of our covers. The O'Keefe 1 in 25. Not a huge print run on these Spider-Man Noirs, so this one was hitting $60 to $70 at release for this incentive. Now it's 15 to 25, so just below ratio as opposed to almost 3 times ratio when it was released. 9.8 will only run you at $70 to $100. So this one was definitely turned into be a bit of a trap. It's definitely back down. Still a cool cover, just there's enough of them that the audience for it wasn't strong enough to keep it going. Our next cover is Spawn #309, the McFarlane Gunslinger variant. Gunslinger was very popular anyway. Back then it was going for $20 to $35. A little surprised with the recent announcements. This one didn't move this week, or at least it didn't move when I looked up values Wednesday night. So I haven't actually had a chance to double check here today. But it was going for 5 to 15 then. 9.8s were going for 60 to 70. So this one was definitely a down, and then I'll be back. I don't know if the announcement that there's potentially a Gunslinger Spawn series coming made this move late this week, but I didn't see it when I looked on Wednesday. Next, we have Canto #2, The Hollow Men, or Canto 2, The Hollow Men #1. This is the Turtles Homage. This was a 1 in 10 by Bishop. And it released, this was going for $25. It's now kind of a $5 to $20 book. 9.8s are still $80 to $100, which is pretty good for a $10, $15 book. So this one has done pretty well, but this second Canto series hasn't demanded the kind of values. I don't think there's any real first appearances. The original Canto series is still the one that people are going after, that #1. This one's interest, but not a ton of interest in. With that, we're out of covers, we're out of option news, we're into comic buzz, and we got several of those before we get into our main category this week, which I'll talk about at the end. First up, we have Amazing Fantasy 15, first appearance of Amadeus Cho. Back then, a 9.8 hit $1,000 for the first time after being a $400 book just a month before. So that is why it hit the list. Now it's $150 to $250 book raw. 9.8s are going for $1,100 to $1,300. This is really just part of all this spec on these young next generation Marvel characters. A lot of people, you could put this kind of in an MCU, but it's not really rumor kind of thing or spec. But there's not really any specific spec on this character. It's just people think eventually they're going to get there. I think it got a while before they get there just because they're just now introducing She-Hulk, but we will see. But anyway, this one is definitely still up and still going strong. Next, we have Static #1, first appearance of Static Shock. This was a milestone, and this was hit the list basically because the announcement that Milestone Comics were returning. We now know the timeline for that. They're mostly seems to be returning as digital as opposed to print, although I think maybe there's going to be print copies later. But back then, this caused this to be a $45, $50 book raw with a $300 for 9.8s. Still $30 to $60 for a raw copy of this. 9.8s are down a little bit, $220 to $270. So I marked this one as down, but it's just slightly down. And really the raw copies are in that same kind of range as they were back then. Still a good book. I think this is probably still a little undervalued. I think there's a lot of potential with Static. The only question is, will DC use it? We will see if this Milestone Comics will lead to something where they actually start using this character more. Because I think it's a character with a lot of potential, but we'll see. Next, we have Ice Cream Man #1. This is just hitting the list just because it's a hot indie series. People really like this series. People are going after this #1. Raw copies of #1 were going for $200 back then. Now they're still going $175 to $225. 9.8s are $5 to $550. So yeah, this one's been really steady. I would say on the raw side, didn't have 9.8 prices. I didn't look back at the 9.8 prices, but this one's been very steady on the raw side, which is most of the sales. Just a really cool indie series that has a lot of fans, and people want this book. Speaking of, the next book is another indie series that is Something is Killing the Children #1. This one just keeps rising. Back then, it was hitting the list because raw copies for the main cover were going for $90. Now they're going for $200 to $300, although they're mostly like $225, $250, but they're, the swing is there all the way up to $300, all the way down to $200, but mostly $225, $250, but way up for raw copies. 9.8s on this one also hitting $500 to $650, although mostly again kind of in the $550ish range. So a lot of interest in this. I know the issue that dropped this week just kind of wrapped this first run, and they're coming back with issue 16. It's going to be like a prequel. I don't know where it's going to go after that, but that's what we know so far. So not disappearing just yet, but this first main storyline has come to an end. So we'll see if the momentum continues as they move forward. But yeah, this one has definitely to this point been a straight cash only book for sure, and definitely up. With that, we're going to move into the rest of the list. That's only 8 books, so we got 10 books left. All of them related to announcements. DC kind of did a online, kind of like what Marvel did later in like December, online announcements of a lot of projects coming. I forget what they call DC Fandom, I think is what they called it. Anyway, that prompted a lot of books to hit the list. There was a trailer for Wonder Woman that caused Wonder Woman #9, the first Barbara Minerva from kind of like the Wonder Woman relaunch or modern Barbara Minerva to hit the list. Back then it was going for $30. 9.8s were going for $150. Wonder Woman 1984 was not as big a hit as the first one. There was some issues. I enjoyed it, but it was definitely not quite as good, I don't think, as the first one. And as a result, this one's back down a little bit. It's not a $5, $15 book, 9.8, 70, 80, which is kind of where it was at before this happened, before it ever hit the list. So this one was definitely a book that was worth being patient on. Next, we have Superboy #9, first appearance of King Shark. This hit the list, kind of got the double whammy. We got a little trailer for Suicide Squad 2, which he's going to be in. Plus, we got a Suicide video game trailer, which he was also featured in. So back then, this jumped up to a $30 book. 9.8s were going for $130. And now it's still a $10 to $40-ish book. 9.8s are still 1 to 150. So this one has been pretty steady. Interest in King Shark has maintained. We will see what kind of role he plays in the upcoming Suicide Squad movie. But so far, people are still on this book, at least at the level they were right after the announcement in those trailers. Next, we have Superman number 4. This is the first appearance of Bloodshot, which we finally found out who Idris Elba is playing. Back then, that caused this book to jump to a $20 to $30 book raw. Now it's kind of a $5 to $20 book raw. 9.8s are still, though, 90 to 140-ish range. So I thought this was a bit of a trap. I think probably after the movie it still is. We'll see. But it's definitely been held better than I expected, which I will say for several of these Suicide Squad books. I'll stand by why I thought they'd fall back, is because some of these characters I doubt very much make it through this movie or are that important. It is a Suicide Squad and it is James Gunn, but we will see. Next, we have Birds of Prey number 56, the first appearance of Savant, also in that Suicide Squad trailer. And back then it was a $25, $30 book raw. And it's also kind of 5 to 20, dropped back, but not all the way back to basically a dollar bin book like it was before. Still maintaining a decent little value for a small key. We will see how big a role Savant actually ends up playing. More Suicide Squad. Coming up next, we have Firestorm, the Nuclear Man, number 35, first appearance of Weasel. Also in the trailer, this one also jumped up to a $15 to $25 book, and it's also now a $5 to $20 book. So a lot of similarities here in these books. They've fallen back a little bit, but still going, 5 to 20. You'll get a $20 sale. Occasionally somebody will snag one for $5, but mostly 10 to 15 is kind of range. So this has been pretty consistent, and that kind of continues with our next book. Although this was not related to Suicide Squad anymore. This was related to the Batman trailer, and this is Batman number 4, the first appearance of the Court of Owls. Back then, this one jumped up to a $20 value, and now it's 5 to 20 again. So it's still staying on that lowest range. Another one that's down, another one that hasn't completely collapsed, but it's definitely down. Interestingly enough, Batman number 6, which is kind of their second appearance, at least the way it's usually described, of the Court of Owls, but it definitely has the better cover. And this one was a $40 to $60 book back then, so people were jumping on this one instead. It's still a $20 to $40 book, so it's also dropped back, but not, I guess, a similar degree, but it went higher to start with, so it's still going for higher values now. This definitely seems to be the Court of Owls book that people are after, mainly, I think, because of this cover. So, one more Batman-related book, and that is Batman Ego, which was a one-shot in prestige format. And basically, there's a scene in the trailer that kind of takes a scene from this book. So people are wondering if this is part of the inspiration for the movie. So people started jumping on this. Raw copies of this were going for $85 to $100. Now they're kind of $30 to $40-ish dollars. So this one has fallen back, basically cut in half or a little more, a little less than half. 9.8 sales have been interesting. There's only been 3 recent 9.8 sales. 350, 299. So take from that what it is. I'm thinking be patient on this one for sure. And you could probably find a deal on this. Recently read this for another series I do, Gotham City Chronicles. It's an excellent read. I really enjoyed it. So I would recommend reading it if you get a chance. But I'd probably still continue to be patient on this. Look for a deal if you're wanting an actual copy of this. 2 more books to go. First is DC Comics Presents number 49. This is the first battle between Black Adam and Superman, and I guess there were some hints that this might happen at some point in the DC movie verse, but who the heck knows with what Warner Brothers is doing, what's going to happen and what's not. But anyway, people were jumping on this. $45 for a raw copy. 9.8 went for $380. Now it's a $20 to $40 book. 9.8s are still going $200 to $300, but this one's definitely back down. Not the collapse I expected, because I just didn't see, there's no real spec here in terms of, in my opinion, on these movie moments don't technically matter that much. I doubt we see it in the next movie, which we're still a ways from, or the first Black Adam movie, which we're still a ways from. But maybe people just like it because it is a cool first meeting of Black Adam and Superman. So I guess that's what's keeping it going a little bit. Last book on our list is JSA, or Justice Society of America, #1. This is the first appearance of Cyclone, who is the granddaughter, I think, of Red Tornado. And this hit the list because she has been cast. She's going to appear in the Black Adam movie, and she was cast. So we found that out. So that's what hit this on the list. Back then it jumped up to a $15, $20 book. 9.8s were going for $150. Now it's a $5 to $15 book, but there's only been 4 recent sales in the last 3 months, 4 sales. So not a lot of interest in this. Not a lot of movement going on with this book, and no 9.8 sales. So this one is definitely way back down. So that's this week's list. For once, it wasn't dominated by Marvel. It was dominated by DC books, and all surrounding spec related to that announcements at the DC fandom event that happened back in August. I want to thank you guys for watching, and we'll catch you next time.